I never thought my worst nightmare would arrive wearing polished shoes and smug grins. But there they were, the HOA president flanked by 2 suits and a forged survey claiming half of my driveway belonged to community access. Her words were just noise, but what tested me most was the effort it took not to break one of their jaws right there in the mud. It hadn't begun today, of course. Let me take you back. The trouble first appeared on an ordinary afternoon when 2 black trucks rolled up and parked at the mouth of my gravel driveway. Shiny, new, expensive machines, each one worth more than my whole cabin. I stood on the porch, arms folded, boots sinking into damp pine needles left from last night's rain. The air was fresh, the ridge quiet, just as my grandfather had intended when he built this place with his bare hands. Quiet was our birthright, but those trucks, they shattered it instantly. 4 men stepped out. Not a realtor this time. Investors. 2 of them wore glossy suits that looked ridiculous against the backdrop of wild Michigan woods. Black shoes polished to a city shine, shoes made for glass offices, not mud and stone. The other 2 wore black. Tactical pants, tight polo shirts with no logos, and the hardened posture of men who've spent their lives as hired muscle. Security, thugs, honestly, there's no difference. I didn't move. Just leaned against the porch post Grandpa had set in the ground 60 years ago and let them look at me. One of the suits lifted a tablet, pointing up at my cabin while muttering to the others. They were casing me, taking notes, planning. And I knew this wasn't random. This storm had been building for months. It began with letters, nasty little slips of paper from the newly formed Sable Ridge Estates HOA. Each one signed with the flowery, passive-aggressive signature of Karen Sunshire, their queen bee of control. First, my grass was an unapproved length. Then, my trim was painted the wrong shade of green. Then, my stacked wood pile was declared unsightly. I burned those letters in my stove and thought nothing of them. At the time, I figured she was just another bored suburban tyrant. But then, 2 weeks ago, the survey crew arrived. Not my crew, not invited. They hammered a line of bright pink flags into my soil, 50 feet inside my boundary. 50 feet. A fake border cutting my land in half like a knife. That was the moment I realized this was bigger than tall grass. This was about theft. So when those 4 men climbed out of their trucks, I reached into my pocket and called my sister. Paige, she picked up on the first ring. Hey, Cole, she said, her voice like a lifeline in the madness. Don't tell me more of Karen's people are on your land. 4 this time, I muttered, keeping my voice low. 2 in suits, 2 meatheads. They're admiring my unsightly woodpile from afar. Her typing clattered over the line. Paige was a county recorder's clerk, sharp as steel and my inside eye on all this nonsense. Like clockwork, she said. This morning, a revised survey map was filed on your parcel. Guess who by? A company named Sable Ridge Minerals, LLC. Matches. Those flags you told me about. Sable Ridge Minerals? I repeated. Never heard of them. Of course not. It's a shell corporation, registered last month to a P.O. box in Lansing. It doesn't exist. But guess whose name is on the HOA filings that support it? Didn't need to guess. Karen Sunshire. Bingo. She's prying at your land with a crowbar made of paperwork. That common access easement she's waving around? It includes your driveway and the entire front stretch of your property. I looked at the men down the road. They were climbing back into their trucks. A scouting trip, nothing more. The real trouble was still coming. They're leaving, I told Paige. But not for long. She sighed. Keep your head, Cole. This isn't just HOA drama anymore. They're serious. I hung up and walked down my driveway once the dust settled. The world was still. No sound but the crunch of gravel under my boots. The pink flags stuck up out of the earth like insults, each one an accusation, each one a challenge. I yanked one free, felt its cheap plastic stem in my hand, and pulled out my phone. Snapped a photo of the license plates on the trucks, sent it to Paige. She texted back minutes later. Trucks registered to Sable Ridge Minerals. The goons are ex-cops with ugly records. The suits are investors. They're not playing games, Cole? So am I replied. That afternoon, I walked the old property line. The real one. The line my grandfather had walked himself, marked by the split oak, the sleeping bear boulder, and the iron survey pin he drove into the dirt in 1960. That line meant something. He left it to me not as a prize, but as a duty. They don't make more land, Cole. Don't ever let them take it. By sundown, I knew my next move. I left the pink flags standing where they were, bait. Then, from my pack, I pulled a spool of wire, thinner than spider silk. I strung it across the flags, rigged to a small chime alarm hidden in the brush. Nothing loud, just enough for me to hear from the cabin. A doorbell for intruders. When dusk settled, my phone buzzed. Page again. Investors from out of state. Security with records. They're in deep. Be careful. I stared out across the ridge as the sun sank and the forest fell quiet. But it wasn't peaceful. It was the silence before a storm. That taut, heavy pause in the air when the world holds its breath. They thought I was some stubborn fool in a shack. They thought intimidation and legal tricks would scare me off. They were wrong. They didn't know what I had. They didn't know who I was. And they sure as hell didn't know what Tess, my wife, was preparing in the basement. The moment those black trucks disappeared over the ridge, Tess got to work. My wife isn't the type to panic. She's the type who organizes. While I was stringing tripwires through the woods, she was down in the basement, converting Grandpa's old workshop into a command center. When I walked in, the place had already changed. The concrete floor was covered in cables, a folding table bristling with 3 monitors and a laptop. The faint scent of sawdust and motor oil now mingled with the acrid tang of fresh electronics. Tess sat there in her old army green sweatshirt, hair tied back, fingers flying across the keyboard. She didn't look afraid. She looked alive. Comms. Hub is operational, she announced. I leaned over her shoulder. One screen displayed a 4-panel grid. Our front porch, the driveway, the gate, and a wide shot of the entire yard. Each camera hardwired, time-stamped, recording locally on its own server. Camera 1 framed the gate perfectly, padlock and not for sale sign dead center. If we went live, there'd be no mistaking where this was or who owned it. Tess pointed at the gear. PoE switch runs on UPS. Gate cam and recorder hold for 30 minutes on battery if the power drops. Sirens and strobes run on a 12-volt backup. 10 solid minutes even off the grid. If internet fails, we still have video. Good, I said, because I doubt they're coming to talk. In the corner, sitting on its charging pad, was our ace, the drone. Not some flimsy toy from a department store, but a heavy-duty survey model built to withstand wind and rain. Underneath it hung a rig Tess had custom-built herself, a spotlight powerful enough to turn midnight into high noon. Drone's fully charged, she said without looking up. Spotlight tested. I've programmed a flight path over the gate. I smiled. Beautiful. Then she pulled up a satellite map. Grandpa's original survey lines glowed green, bold, and true. Overlaid in red was the fraudulent border Karen's. Crew had filed. The red box cut a jagged wound through the green. There's your battleground, Tess said. Right on cue, my phone buzzed. Page again. Digging deeper on Karen. Not just a bored HOA president. Bought her house 6 months ago for cash. Before that? Land acquisition consultant for a mining conglomerate out west. The pieces clicked. Grandpa had always said the ridge was rich with iron ore, the backbone of the mountain. Karen didn't want community parks or better property values. She wanted to carve the ridge open, bleed it dry, sell its bones to the highest bidder. I showed Tess the message. Her jaw tightened. So Sable Ridge Minerals isn't a real estate front. It's a mining company in disguise. Exactly, I said. And my land sits on the highest point. Without this cabin, they can't access the deposit. I'm the key. That's why they're coming. We worked for hours, layering defenses. First layer, legal, the live stream. Tess rigged it so with one click, the cameras would broadcast under the title, illegal eviction attempt in progress. She even added a link to the county's public property records so viewers could see the conflict themselves. Second layer, physical, the gate. A solid iron beast, but vulnerable to brute force. I looped a heavy logging chain through the posts and padlock, but left it dangling loose. Bait. I rigged a quick pull cable back into the workshop so I could snap it shut from inside. Third, layer psychological, light and sound, the drone spotlight. The porch speaker wired to a microphone at my desk. When the moment came, they wouldn't just see us, they'd hear us too. By nightfall, the ridge was silent again. Too silent. We ate sandwiches in the basement, eyes flicking constantly to the monitors. Every gust of wind sounded like footsteps. Every shifting shadow looked like a figure. "What if they come with a warrant?" Tess asked quietly. "They won't," I said firmly. "Paige is watching the courthouse system. If a judge signs anything, we'll know instantly. Right now, they're leaning only on their own fake paperwork." We waited. The minutes stretched into an hour, then 2. I almost believed they'd backed off. Then the driveway cam lit up. Headlights. 2 black trucks again. Slow, deliberate, cautious. This time they killed the lights. A sedan slid in behind them. The realtor, clutching a clipboard, shrinking under her umbrella. Tess whispered, "Showtime." The truck doors opened. 4 silhouettes emerged, the suits and the hired. Muscle. They huddled for a moment, then advanced up my driveway with steady purpose. The gate creaked under their push, swinging open just enough until the loose chain caught. They smirked at the padlock, assuming it was weak. One of the goons raised, bolt cutters ready to snap it like twine. Then one of the suits pointed at the ground, at the pink survey flags. He stepped confidently over the wire strung between them. The alarm in our workshop gave a sharp, metallic chirp. "That's the signal," I said. My hand gripped the red industrial switch on the wall. Tess's finger hovered over her mouse. "Now." I slammed the switch. The maglock clamped the gate with a hard thunk. I yanked the pull cable. The chain snapped tight, the padlock sealing shut. At the same instant, Tess clicked. The drone lifted into the night, its spotlight igniting the yard in a brutal cone of white. The intruders froze, shielding their eyes like startled animals. Then Tess clicked again. The live stream went live. I leaned into the mic, my voice booming from the porch speaker into the storm. "You are trespassing on private property. Your actions are being recorded and broadcast live." For one long moment, no one moved. They were trapped, blinded, and the whole world was watching. The 4 men stood frozen in the glare of the drone's spotlight, their arrogance melting away under its unforgiving beam. Their sharp suits and tactical bravado looked ridiculous now, exposed like thieves caught in the act. One of the suits, tall, thinning hair plastered to his forehead, was the first to find his voice. He squinted up at the drone and shouted, "Turn that damn light off!" His outrage sounded brittle, almost desperate. The shorter, heavier man pulled out his phone, tapping at the screen in panic. The glow lit his face, but the panic grew deeper, as nothing loaded. Out here on the ridge, cell service was a prayer even in good weather. Tonight, under heavy clouds, there was nothing. They were cut off. Inside our basement command center, Tess was already moving. Her fingers danced across the keyboard, adding captions to the live stream. Location, Elk Ridge. Parties, Sable Ridge Minerals, LLC. Attempted illegal eviction in progress. Paige was spreading the feed like wildfire through local forums. Comments were exploding. "What's happening? Is this real?" Paige filled them in. Karen, the fake survey, the HOA scam. She was turning our defense into a public trial. The bigger of the 2 security men stepped forward, looking straight at the porch camera. His voice was a low growl, steady and threatening. "You're making a big mistake. We have a legal right to be here. You're the one breaking the law." I leaned into my mic. My voice rolled out into the night, amplified and steady. "The only mistake was you stepping onto my land. Go back to your truck and leave. This is your one warning." The ridge seemed to answer me. A wind rose, whispering through the pines with an ominous voice of its own. Dark clouds rolled fast across the sky, bruised and heavy. The temperature dropped sharply. I could feel the storm pressing in. Thunder growled across the valley. "Cole," Tess said, pointing at a radar map on one of her screens. Severe thunderstorm warning just hit the county. The men at the gate heard it too. They looked at one another nervously. Being trapped on someone's land was bad enough. Being trapped in the middle of a violent mountain storm? Worse, the first fat drops of rain slapped against the cabin roof. Within seconds, the sky opened up. Sheets of water hammered down, blurring the cameras with silver streaks. The intruders huddled under the downpour, their jackets useless against nature's fury. Then the lightning came. One brilliant flash illuminated the ridge in ghostly white. A crack of thunder followed instantly, so violent it rattled the cabin walls. And then, darkness. The monitors went dead. The hum of the fridge upstairs ceased. The basement fell silent but for the roar of rain on the roof. "Power's out," I muttered. The maglock on the gate dropped, fail safe. Only my chain held now. Tess was already in motion. She flicked on a small lantern. Her laptop and one auxiliary screen flickered alive on battery. "Tree must have taken down the main line," she said. "We've still got local recorders on UPS, but..." Her voice faltered. "Internet's down, stream is dead." We were blind to the outside world. The drone still hovered overhead, its spotlight cutting the storm but without control. Soon its battery would run down, and it would return to base. "How long left?" I asked. "Maybe 20 minutes with the light on," she said. "Leave it," I told her. "We can't control it. Let it run its course." Moments later, the drone's return sequence kicked in. Its spotlight drifted back toward its charging pad. The intruders, once trapped in glaring white, were plunged into the storm's darkness again. At first, there was only rain and wind. Then, new sounds. Clink, 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 metal on metal. "They're cutting," Tess whispered. A sharper sound followed, the savage snap of hardened steel biting through iron. Bolt cutters on my chain. "They're through," she said, her voice tight. The gate swung inward on the grainy battery feed, rain streaking across the lens. The men stepped inside. Phase 2. Calm washed over me like ice water. The waiting was over. The fight had begun. I flipped open the protective cover on the old toggle switch Grandpa had installed decades ago. He'd called it his bear deterrent. I pressed it down. The ridge exploded in light and sound. Twin industrial sirens mounted on the cabin screamed at ear-splitting pitch, a shrill mechanical howl that pierced bone and brain alike. Strobe lights strobed across the yard, turning rain and shadows into a dizzying chaos. The intruders staggered, hands clamped to ears, blinking against the blinding flashes. They had expected a dark, silent cabin. Instead, they walked into a storm of man-made fury. For a moment, it worked. They faltered, but they weren't amateurs. One of the goons recovered quickly, drew his handgun, and fired twice. The shots cracked through the storm, punching holes in one of the sirens. Its shriek choked off, leaving only one screaming. The other thug smashed a strobe with the butt of his pistol, dimming the chaos. They adapted. They pushed forward, and they shoved the gate wide, ushering the drenched suits in behind them. The realtor cowered by her sedan, filming but not daring to cross the line. The 4 men stood in my yard, soaked, furious, but still determined. They thought they'd weathered the worst. They had no idea what was coming next. Rain hammered the ridge, lightning tearing the sky into jagged scars. The intruders regrouped in my yard, dripping, furious, but unbroken. They thought they'd seen my hand. They thought the floodlights and sirens were my best defense. They were wrong. From the driveway, the throaty growl of a powerful engine cut through the storm. One of the goons had sprinted back to the trucks. Headlights flared, high beams stabbing through the rain as a black Ford F-350 roared to life. Its tires churned mud as it reversed straight toward my gate. "They're not just opening it," I said coldly, watching the feed. "They're going to rip it out." The truck stopped, engine snarling. A heavy tow chain clinked as they threw its hook around the iron bars. Brute force, raw and simple. The kind of plan that required no thought, just horsepower. The F-350's engine screamed as the chain went taut. The ground trembled. The gate groaned, iron twisting, wood splintering. The hinges squealed in agony. The legacy my grandfather had set in place half a century ago was being torn apart by steel and greed. Inside the basement, Tess's laptop battery blinked red. Our last monitor was dying. Soon, we'd be blind. But they had overlooked something critical. They thought the only power on this ridge came from the grid. They were wrong. I grabbed a heavy-duty flashlight and sprinted out the back door of the workshop into the storm. Wind and rain slapped me like open hands, but I pushed through, circling to a tarp-covered hulk nobody outside my family even knew existed, the heart of our defense. I ripped the tarp away. Beneath it sat a military surplus diesel generator, the size of a small car. Old, ugly, indestructible. Beside it, bolted to concrete, was a logging winch designed to drag redwoods uphill. My grandfather's idea of overkill. I primed the choke, slammed the starter, and held my breath. The beast coughed, belched black. Smoke then roared to life with a deep, earth-shaking growl. Power surged. The ground vibrated under my boots. The game had changed. I sprinted back inside, threw a breaker, and the cabin exploded with light. Floodlights mounted on the eaves burned through the storm like miniature suns. The not-for-sale sign gleamed blinding white. The yard was no longer darkness, it was a stage. The F-350 driver hesitated, startled. He slammed the gas again, tires shrieking, mud flying, engine screaming. The gate buckled, hinges crying out in pain. Not tonight. I engaged the winch. It's steel. Cable hidden beneath the workshop wall, snaked taut to a buried anchor beside the gatepost. With a hungry metallic groan, the cable pulled. The winch and the truck locked in a duel, 400 modern horsepower versus a half-century-old engine built to drag mountains. The truck's tires spun helplessly, digging trenches into my yard. The logging winch didn't even flinch. Its diesel motor chugged steady, relentless, unstoppable. I was holding the gate. The gate was holding the truck. The driver finally released the accelerator. The engine whined down, leaving only the victorious thrum of my generator and the steady growl of the winch. The men stared in disbelief, mud streaking their faces, the cable gleaming in the floodlights like a steel snake from hell. Their brute force had failed. Their momentum was gone. And then, out of the second black truck, she appeared. A lone figure, stepped into the storm, a black umbrella useless against the wind. Her expensive shoes sank into the mud with every deliberate step. Her face was framed in cold fury, lips drawn tight, eyes glittering with controlled rage. Karen Sunshusher, the queen herself, the HOA president turned land baron, the storm whipped. Her floral blouse beneath her coat threatened to tear the umbrella from her hands. But she didn't falter. She advanced until she stood beneath the floodlights, framed in their harsh glare. She didn't look beaten. She looked like a general arriving to crush a rebellion. Her drenched men gathered around her, demoralized, but she looked energized, fed by the confrontation. She didn't shout. She didn't need to. She flicked a hand toward the gate. "Unlock it," she ordered, her voice cold, commanding. Then she stepped right into the beam of the porch camera, close enough that raindrops gleamed on her skin. The live stream was dead, but she didn't know what was still recording. She thought this was private now, just me and her. Her eyes locked on the cabin. She smiled, sharp, smug, unshaken. "Mr. Mercer," she said, her voice carrying over the I. Storm. The same condescending lilt from every letter she'd ever sent. Only now it dripped with menace. "This is over." Karen stood under the floodlights like she owned the ridge, rain plastering her hair to her face, her umbrella rattling in the wind. Her voice cut through the storm, sharp and commanding. "This is over, Mr. Mercer. You've had your fun with your lights and toys, but it's pointless. This property is no longer yours." I walked back into the basement command center, Karen's voice filling the speakers from the porch microphone. Tess's eyes flicked to me, tense. "Get off my property, Karen," I said. my voice echoing from the outdoor speakers, cold and unwavering. She lifted her chin, holding up her phone as though it were a weapon. I have the paperwork right here. Survey filed and accepted. The easement is legally executed. This land belongs to the Sable Ridge HOA for community development. Filed, I corrected, my voice steady. Not accepted. County recorder. Flagged it the second it hit the system. Her lips curled in a smirk. She gestured, and her security men shifted closer, hands brushing their holsters. One thumb snapped a strap free. A threat, Tess whispered in my ear from behind the screens. Generators steady. We're recording everything. Crystal clear. Karen ignored my words, taking another step closer, her tone dropping, sly and coaxing. Listen, Cole, you're squatting on land that isn't yours anymore. You can still walk away. Take your things and go, and we'll be generous. $5,000. Cash. I laughed, a low, bitter sound. 5,000? For land worth? Millions to your mining company? My land is not for sale. And you're trespassing. That cracked her veneer. The mask of politeness slipped, revealing the naked hunger beneath. Her eyes narrowed. Her words became fangs. You have nothing, Mr. Mercer. You're one man in a wooden shack against a multi-million-dollar development. The law is on our side. The money is on our side. You cannot win. She leaned toward the porch camera, her smile now the sharp grin of a predator. We will move you by force. We will drag you out and have the sheriff arrest you for obstruction. No one will help you. No one will even know what happened here until it's too late. One of her guard's hands hovered over his gun. The promise of violence hung thick in the air. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't show fear. I let silence carry weight, then said simply, You talk a lot about the law, Karen. Then let's talk law. Meet me at the hood of your truck. I have a document you should see. For the first time, I rattled her. Her expression flickered. Confusion, suspicion, then curiosity. Her arrogance wouldn't let her refuse. With a tilt of her head, she led her soaked entourage back to the F-350, still chained to my winch. I stepped out into the storm, no coat, no weapon. Just a battered green ammo can in my hands. Tess watched from the living room window. She was my unseen rifle in the dark, always covering me. I walked straight through the mud, set the can down on the hood with a metallic thunk, and popped the latch. The guard stiffened, expecting a weapon. Instead, I lifted a clear plastic tube and slid out a rolled document, yellowed, with age, ink fading but strong. My grandfather wasn't just a logger, I said. My voice carried steady over the wind. For 30 years, he was this county's chief surveyor. He didn't just live on this land. He mapped it. I unrolled, the vellum across the truck hood pinning it with my flashlight. The elegant hand-drawn lines glowed under the beam. The title block read, Elk Ridge Survey, 1960. This is the master plat map. The original, filed and recorded 60 years ago. Every map since is based on this one. I tapped the landmarks. The county road, the granite boulder, the split trunk oak. Here's my legal boundary. And here, I pulled one of Karen's soaked pink flags from my pocket and dropped it on the vellum. Mud smeared across the pristine ink. Is your fraudulent line, 50 feet inside, a lie? The suits leaned in, eyes widening as they realized what they were looking at. Their faces shifted from arrogance to horror. They knew fraud when they saw it. They could smell prison in the rain. And the best part? I continued. My sister Paige processed your filing this morning. She scanned your fake survey. She copied this original. She's already been on the phone with the sheriff for the last hour. Karen's face drained of color. Panic flickered in her eyes. For the first time, she looked like prey. Then from down the mountain came a new sound. Low, grinding, mechanical. Headlights pierced the darkness. Several vehicles climbing the switchbacks in unison. Karen's men froze, eyes widening. What the hell is that? One of the suits muttered, voice thin with fear. I allowed myself a grim smile. That, Karen, is the law you're so fond of quoting. But before the convoy could crest the ridge, another sound tore through the storm, a bone-snapping crack, followed by the earth-shaking crash of a massive tree slamming onto the mountain road. The headlights halted. Silence fell, broken only by rain and the rumble of my generator. Karen whipped her head at me, eyes wide with confusion. What was that? I let her see nothing in my face. That was a very large white pine that's been leaning for 10 years. Looks like the storm finally brought it down. Terrible timing for you. I didn't tell her I'd been watching that tree for years. I didn't tell her that maybe, just maybe, I'd helped it along with a chainsaw earlier that day. I let her think it. I let her realize she'd been walking into my trap since the first step. She was boxed in. No way forward, no way back. Her control shattered, and then desperation flared in her guard's eyes. His hand dropped toward his pistol. Don't. My voice was low, flat, and carried more weight than a thunderclap. He froze. Even through the rain, he felt the steel in it. Down below, flashlights were cutting through the trees. Voices shouted up the ridge. Sheriff's Department! Announce yourself! Karen was cornered. Her lies, her leverage, her muscle, all crumbling, and, for the first time, she looked utterly helpless. The storm raged, lightning splitting the sky, but the fight was already over. Flashlights bobbed through the pines as deputies clawed their way up the ridge, voices sharp and commanding over the roar of rain. Sheriff's Department! Hands where we can see them! Karen spun, her mask of control cracking like glass. Her men stiffened, caught between orders and survival. The taller suit tried to bark something about legal rights, but his voice drowned under the echoing. Command of a deputy's shotgun being racked. On your knees! Now! The guards hesitated, but when beams of light hit their pistols, they froze. With trembling hands, they raised them skyward. The suits followed, mud streaking their expensive trousers as they dropped. The storm that had been their cover now left them exposed, humiliated, cornered like rats. Karen remained standing, drenched, trembling, but still clinging to arrogance like it was armor. She clutched her ruined umbrella as if it could shield her from reality. A deputy shoved through the gate, breath steaming, rain plastering his uniform to his body. He took one look at the scene, the torn chain, the winch cable, the ruined survey flag in the mud, the ancient plat map glowing under my flashlight, and shook his head. Karen Sunshear? He barked. She lifted her chin, defiant. Do you have any idea who I am? This is my... Ma'am! He cut her off, voice hard as stone. You're under arrest for filing fraudulent land surveys, attempted unlawful eviction, trespassing, and conspiracy to defraud. Her words withered in her throat. Her umbrella slipped from her fingers, snapping uselessly in the mud. The deputies cuffed her, mud splashing up her tailored coat. The guards cursed, but obeyed, wrists bound in steel. The suits protested about investments and shares, but their voices were drowned by thunder and the hollow click of cuffs. Tess joined me at the cabin door, her hand slipping into mine. She looked at me, eyes tired but fierce. It's over, she whispered. I wasn't so sure. Men like Karen don't go down easy. Money and influence buy long ropes in this world. But for tonight, at least, the rope had snapped taut. The deputies loaded the intruders into their vehicles. Engines growled to life, red and blue strobes cutting through the sheets of rain. One by one, the black trucks rolled down the ridge, caged by the law. Karen's face glared out from the backseat of a cruiser, pale and twisted with hatred, as if this were only a temporary setback. But hatred doesn't rebuild power once the mask is ripped off. By the time the last taillights vanished into the storm, the ridge was silent again. The generator still hummed. The floodlights still glared across the battered gate, and I still stood on my land. When dawn finally broke, it came quietly. The storm had passed, leaving the ridge washed clean. Sunlight caught the wet leaves, each one glittering like polished glass. Steam rose off the ground in pale, ghostly ribbons. I walked the line my grandfather had walked, past the boulder, past the split oak, to the iron pin driven deep into the soil 60 years ago. I knelt there, brushing the mud from the marker, letting my hand rest on the cold metal. They didn't take it, Grandpa, I murmured. Not 1 inch. Behind me, Tess called from the porch. Paige had texted, news outlets already running the story, the live stream recovered from local backup, the fraudulent filings exposed for all to see. Karen Sunshire wasn't a feared president anymore. She was a criminal defendant. Her empire of lies had drowned in the same mud she tried to steal. I stood, looking out over the ridge. My ridge. This fight wasn't about square footage or property lines. It was about legacy, about duty, about refusing to bow to people who think power and money can erase truth. They had tried to bury me under false papers, broken laws, and brute force. Instead, they had buried themselves. And as the morning sun rose higher, burning the last fog from the valley, I finally let the tension drain from my shoulders. Tess slipped her arm through mine, warm and steady. The land was safe. The ridge was ours, and the storm had passed, for now.